Start visualizing positively. Positive thoughts will create positive visuals. Have you ever heard someone say, "I can just see it," when they are enthusiastic about something? I know from experience that if I can see something as a possibility, it has a much better chance of happening than if I can't see it happening. Give your higher self a chance once in a while by giving your possibility quota a boost. Keep a book of inspiring quotes nearby so you can change a negative wavelength the moment it descends on you. Here are some of my personal favorites. Know everything you can about what you're doing. My father, Fred Trump. I know the price of success: dedication, hard work, and an unremitting devotion to the things you want to see happen. Frank Lloyd Wright. A leader has the right to be beaten, but never the right to be surprised. Napoleon. Let's avoid subtlety on this one. Charles Reese, Executive Vice President of Development, the Trump Organization. He who looks outside his own heart dreams. He who looks inside his own heart awakens. Carl Jung. Exciting is a dull word for the business we're in. Fred Trump. You're the only guy who can wear a cashmere overcoat to a baseball game and get away with it. Regis Philbin. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Albert Einstein. Continuous effort, not strength or intelligence, is the key to unlocking our potential. Winston Churchill. I remember when I was the Donald Duck. Read Carl Jung. I find reading psychology and self-help books useful. Carl Jung's theories fascinate me and keep my mind open to my own and the collective unconscious. Reading his books can also be a good form of self-defense. There's a lot we don't know about ourselves. Likewise, there's a lot we may not know about everyone else. Jung used the word psyche to refer to both the conscious and the unconscious processes. That's where the word psycho comes from, by the way. I first became aware of Jung through an acquaintance who had endured some extreme ordeals. Yet he remained calm. I couldn't fathom where he got this sort of grace under fire demeanor, so I asked him, and he told me that Jung's ideas kept him centered. My friend put it like this: Donald, I've learned from my experiences. As a safety factor, I very often see other people as a revolver that could be pointed at me. They are the gun. I, however, am the trigger. So I speak and tread carefully. It's an effective visual aid to avoid conflicts, as I was unwittingly among people who were actually psychos underneath their dignified personas. We never know what will trigger another person's killer instinct. It can be something that happened when they were 5 years old. So avoid being the trigger, and the revolver will not be a threat. This synopsis of his philosophy made such an impact on me that I immediately started reading about Carl Jung. I'm glad I did, because it helped me in my business as well as in my personal life. We are all evolving human beings, and being aware of this gave me a big boost toward maturity. It also made me less inclined to be surprised by so-called aberrant behavior. I have to stress that I am not cynical, but I am aware. I hate being in situations where I'm asking myself, how could this have happened? This reminds me of my favorite quote from Napoleon about being surprised. A good leader shouldn't be. You have to know yourself as well as know other people to be an effective leader. For me, reading the work of Carl Jung was a step in the right direction. If someone had told me in business school that studying psychology would be important for financial success, I would not have believed it. My friend's story changed that, and I am grateful for him for such cogent advice. The relatively small number of hours I've spent reading Jung have been more than worth it. Start with his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, and you will be in for a fascinating time while simultaneously fine-tuning your intuition and instincts. You will also gain a technique for seeing into versus reading into the people around you. Believe me, this will serve you well on many levels. The word persona has an interesting root. It comes from the Latin word meaning mask. This, however, is not derogatory. It's necessary. Each of us has a persona. We need it for survival. It's the face we put on for public use, and it can be intentional or unconscious. For example, a salesman who has lost his entire family in an accident is naturally devastated. But to work effectively with his customers, he must appear cheerful and confident. That's part of his persona. It's a survival device. The only danger is when people become their personae. That means something has been shut off somewhere along the line, and these people will end up hiding behind the false personality that works professionally. As I am very much in the public eye, this hit home, and I gave it considerable thought. Fortunately, I am aware of my public side as well as my private side, and while I'm not one for hiding much, I know there are several dimensions in which I operate. That's one reason I feel at home at the Trump Organization. The people I work with day in and day out know I'm not entirely a glam guy. They see how hard I work. One person said, "I am very much like a Mormon," which I took as high praise. Anyway, reading Jung will give you insights into yourself and the ways in which you and other people operate. Have an ego. As you know, this rule has been easy for me to follow. But hear me out. I've got a good reason for it. Having a well-developed ego, contrary to popular opinion, is a positive attribute. It is the center of our consciousness and serves to give us a sense of purpose. I remember saying to someone, "Show me someone with no ego, and I'll show you a big loser." I was trying to stir things up and provoke a reaction, but I later realized the basic idea is on target. The ego works to keep our conscious and unconscious aspects in balance. Too much either way can be detrimental. No ego means very little life force, and too much means a dictatorial personality. Keep your ego in a healthy balance, for your own well-being as well as for those around you. Strive for wholeness. It's an intelligent approach to life and business. Understanding how egos work can be a great tool. Did you ever notice how you can deflate an opponent by simply saying, "Yeah, whatever you say"? By doing this, you are gently assuming a no-ego position, which disarms the other person while at the same time taking the wind out of their sails. It gives you the peace of mind necessary to allow you to concentrate on something more important than dealing with someone who is playing God. Sometimes, rather than confronting a tyrant or a psycho directly, it's more effective to keep the knowledge to yourself and proceed accordingly behind the scenes. We've all heard the saying that knowledge is power. The intelligent use of that power is crucial in the business world, and it's just as important in your personal life. Your mind can build castles. Just make sure the foundations are in place first. You and the people around you will be grateful for that. Keep critics in perspective. In any job, you will be criticized at some point. Let's face it, nobody but a total masochist wants to be criticized. There is constructive criticism, and then there is destructive criticism. Here's how to assess both types. Number one, first of all, consider the source. Should this person's opinion even matter to you? Number two, if it does matter to you, take a few minutes to consider whether anything helpful can result from the criticism. Others can often see things that we have overlooked. Use their keen eyes to your advantage. Number three, critics serve their purpose. Sometimes they serve a larger purpose, and sometimes they serve their own purpose. American Idol judge Simon Cowell can be critical of the performers on the program, but he's fair, and he's honest, and I don't think American Idol would work without him. Simon was nice enough to compliment The Apprentice in an interview. "I think it's absolutely fantastic," he told the Daily News. "I think Trump is superb on the show. He's not hamming it up. He's just playing himself, and that's very hard to do on television." As I said, Simon is a fair and honest critic, and I am a fan of his. Number four, Everyone has an opinion. In most cases, it's not worth the paper it's written on. Number 5. If the opinion is worth the paper it's written on, and it's written in a paper people are buying and reading, then realize that if people didn't find you interesting enough for public consumption, they wouldn't be taking the time to criticize you. Think of their criticism as a compliment, proof of your significance. Homework is required, and there will be a test. People who think achieving success is a linear A to Z process, a straight shot to the top, simply aren't in touch with reality. There are very few bona fide overnight success stories. It just doesn't work that way. Success appears to happen overnight because we all see stories in newspapers and on TV about previously unknown people who suddenly become famous. But consider a sequoia tree that has been growing for several hundred years. Just because a television crew one day decides to do a story about that tree doesn't mean it didn't exist before. In 1955, Glenn Gould, the classical pianist from Toronto, rocketed to international fame by recording Bach's Goldberg Variations. He was young and unusual, but he had already been practicing the piano for close to 20 years. He may have seemed like an overnight sensation to the general public, but anyone who's been working at something for 20 years isn't likely to agree with that assessment. I have to admit that my knowledge of classical music is limited, but from what little I've read on the subject, I know that the process of becoming a classical musician is a long and demanding one. The amount of practice hours required to master an instrument is astounding, and also never-ending. How do they do it? I'm not sure, but I would guess that passion plays a large part. Every industry and profession has its bottom line for what is required to succeed. If you can't stand to practice every day, being a musician is out of the question. If you hate to exercise, being an athlete is not for you. In business, every business, the bottom line is understanding the process. If you don't understand the process, you'll never reap the rewards of the process. You'll never last long enough to achieve your overnight success. Part of the process is doing your homework. You have to know what you're getting into first. That was one of my father's strongest beliefs. We've all heard the phrase, "You're barking up the wrong tree." It brings to mind a funny image, but in reality, it can be embarrassing. Not doing your homework can result in something analogous, so do a few things first to avoid this. We can learn from our mistakes, but it's better to learn from our successes. When I hear people say, "Well, it was an interesting experience," I can usually safely assume they were referring to something that didn't work out the way they'd planned. I don't find my goof-ups to be amusing or interesting. Can you imagine hearing a surgeon say, "Well, it didn't go quite right, but I sure learned a lot"? I wouldn't want that guy operating on me. The same applies to anyone in business, because if you're in business, it's not just your money involved, but very often the money and well-being of others as well. In my business, I can't take chances. If something is not quite right with the design or construction of a superstructure, a lot of people could be injured or killed. I've got to know what's going on. Bottom line, it will be my responsibility. People see the finished product. Wow, a skyscraper. What goes into it is another story. Construction isn't glamorous. It's a serious and often dangerous endeavor. Fortunately, I understood this from my earliest days in the business, so there's a certain gravity in my approach to the construction of any building. That's where having learned to do my homework comes in handy. It's a necessary requirement, not an extracurricular course to enhance my productivity. Not only do I have to know exactly what I'm doing, but I've also got to make sure I find contractors who know exactly what they're doing as well. That's why I'm tough on them, and that's why I'm equally tough on myself. A lot of lives are at stake at our work. We don't want any interesting experiences. We all know what it's like to pretend to study. There are some courses in school that just don't hold your attention. If you are choosing a career, keep that in mind. What most holds your attention? Consider a pyramid. Did you ever notice how large and solid the foundation is? Did you notice the carefully graduated levels that eventually lead to the pinnacle? Now turn the pyramid upside down. That's a representation of topsy-turvy thinking. You don't start at the top. You start with the foundation. The stronger, the better. The world moves along at such a fast clip that we have little patience when things are slow, whether it's a line at a supermarket or internet access. We become intolerant of those things that cannot be accelerated or skipped entirely. I can't speed up the foundation work for a building, nor can I expect to play piano like Glenn Gould just because I want to. Know the limitations as well as the possibilities of everything you do. Find out as much as you can yourself about what you plan to do, and don't expect anyone to act as your favorite grandmother in wanting what's best for you. Most people want what's best for themselves, not for you. If those people have already spent a great deal of effort on their homework, why should they share it with you? Listen to a ping-pong game. I learned a long time ago not to just listen, but to listen judiciously. You can learn a lot from the people around you. You just have to be discerning about the information that comes your way. A lot of the so-called information I receive turns out to be someone's personal opinion. We're all entitled to our 2 cents worth, but sometimes that's all it amounts to. Be aware of the marketplace. Know what's going on now. That's one of the reasons I devote several hours a day to reading. That's how long it takes to both keep up with current events and learn from the greats in history. How can you expect to be successful if your idea of what's happening in the world is vague or non-existent? It's like saying, I know that September 11th happened, but I choose not to acknowledge it. It gets in the way of my positive outlook on things. That approach is fine if you're a professional fairy tale writer. There's another side to everything, so develop your ability to see it or even hear it. I once met a young woman from Hong Kong who worked on Wall Street in emerging markets. She had an uncanny ability to predict certain events in the marketplace. It seemed almost like a psychic gift to me. One day I asked her how she could be so on target in her work, and she likened knowing and predicting the global markets to listening to a ping-pong game. At first I thought she was joking or perhaps just being evasive, but she went on to explain her theory. I'm not kidding you, Donald. When I was growing up, we had a ping-pong table in the den, and I could hear the games my brothers would play, sometimes for hours, when I was studying in my room. I discovered that I could discern the tilt of the paddle and the outcome of the volley just by the sound of the ping-pong ball being hit and the sound of it landing on the other side of the net. I knew the results, the repercussions, and the recovery that would be required to successfully handle what had been dealt. Later I applied this to my work in emerging markets and found I could often predict what would be happening just by concentrating on world events and thinking of the sound of ping-pong balls being hit around the globe. Ping-pong is really the reason behind my success. I was astounded. That's my idea of tuning in. I must add that this young woman had all the education in finance that her position required. She was a bright student. What set her apart from everyone else was the way she applied her knowledge and her keen analysis of the game of ping-pong to her work. She may even have done this on an unconscious level initially, but tapping into this resource gave her an uncanny edge. The lesson I learned from her story is never to underestimate the power of awareness. Find out what other people have done to succeed, and then be prepared to do 10 times more. There are no guarantees. Comparing ourselves to others is a waste of time. I've heard people say, well, Mr. Lucky had $1 million before he was 30, and I've worked just as hard as he has. Well, Mr. Lucky has nothing to do with you, your possibilities, your success, or your failure. Don't let anyone else be your yardstick. That's taking power away from yourself in a big way. You've got your own personal blueprint to attend to. We can't all be Tiger Woods, J.Lo, Bill Gates, or whoever it is you would like to be, and sometimes that's a hard fact to face. You may have already experienced defeat. That happens. It happens a lot. But the fact that you have aspirations to begin with is putting you on the road to success right now. No matter how defeated you may feel, you've still got a chance. But it won't happen by itself. Get to work. I'll sum up with two of my favorite quotes. There are no shortcuts to anywhere worth going. Beverly Sills. The harder I work, the luckier I get. Gary Player. Reflect for 3 hours a day. I read an article recently in which European exchange students living in the United States all agreed on one aspect of American life. The noise level here is very high. We seem to avoid quiet moments. Even lapses in conversations are quickly filled with banter or some kind of interference. It made me realize how much I need a certain amount of quiet time, usually about 3 hours a day, in order to stay balanced. It's time I use to read and reflect, and I always feel renewed and refreshed by this. It also gives me material to feed my extroverted nature. For me, the early morning hours are best for this kind of reflection. I'm an early riser, usually up by 5 a.m., which gives me a few hours to read newspapers and magazines of all sorts, local, national, and international. In the evening, after a black-tie dinner, I'll unwind by stopping at my local Korean grocery for snacks, potato chips, and pretzels. That will be my dinner. I rarely get to eat at those black-tie events, and I'd rather have the junk food anyway. Once I'm home, I read books, usually biographies. Now and then I like to read about philosophers, particularly Socrates, who emphasizes that you should follow the convictions of your conscience, which basically means thinking for yourself, a philosophy I tend to agree with. It may not make you too popular, but it's essential for lucid thought, and it's a good way to avoid being part of a herd mentality of any sort. I read as much as I can, but not as much as I'd like, because there are so many constraints on my time. I'm grateful for the contribution Oprah Winfrey has made to our country in regard to reading. In my book, The America We Deserve, I wrote about the deplorable state of reading in this country. Since Oprah decided to do something about it, there has been a noticeable upswing in book sales, and writers are once again considered to be cool people rather than dinosaurs. I cannot thank Oprah enough for what she has done, and I hope every person in this country realizes the positive influence she has had. We all owe Oprah a big thank you, and I'd like to lead the crowd in saying so. I like movies and television as much as anyone else, but reading is a form of replenishment for me. The potato chips and pretzels help too. Dress for your culture. I used to pride myself in buying very inexpensive suits and other clothing. It just didn't make sense to pay thousands of dollars for great clothes when you could buy something for $100. Who would know the difference? Over the years, I've learned that this is wrong-headed. I now buy very high-quality shoes, and they seem to last forever, whereas the cheapos used to wear out quickly and always looked as cheap as the price I'd paid for them. The same is true for suits. These days, I go for Brioni, whose service and attention to detail is second to none. They supply most of the clothing for the apprentice, so I have tremendous loyalty to them, and I got a good deal. They also make great overcoats. The way we dress says a lot about us before we ever say a word. To me, dressing successfully means understanding your environment, knowing the culture, and making an effort to reflect and respect it. The look in Beverly Hills may be attractive, but that same look may be met with scorn on Wall Street. Success is hard enough to achieve without showing up on Casual Friday in a three-piece suit. Don't put up unnecessary hurdles for yourself. Make it easy for people to take you seriously. I would wonder about someone who arrived for a meeting or an interview and was dressed inappropriately for the culture of that particular workplace. For example, a guy showing up at Trump Tower in a cowboy hat, boots, and a fringed cowhide jacket. It's more about culture than style. Be aware of your surroundings and dress accordingly. Some people can get away with anything. Most people can't. Misha Koppel, who works at the Trump Organization, usually looks like a Canadian Mountie in full regalia. To look at him, you'd think he was about to lead an expedition through the Rockies. Then again, my buildings are tall, and he scouts the right locations for them, so maybe there's a reason for his get-ups. It works for him, and he does a good job, so I don't mind. It's certainly not groundbreaking news that the early victories by the women on The Apprentice were, to a very large extent, dependent on their sex appeal. The fact that sex sells is nothing new. However, women are judged harshly when they go too far, so be careful in how you present yourself. If you want to be acknowledged for your intelligence as well as your beauty, don't stand in your own way. Not everyone can tune out a knock-em-dead appearance. Think of how you would like to be perceived, and proceed from there. I tend to notice what people are wearing only if they look exceptionally well put together, or exceptionally badly put together. It has more to do with style than which designer they may or may not be wearing. As I said, expensive clothing usually looks like it was worth the price. Have you ever noticed how we tend to pigeonhole people in certain professions by their appearance? It's a form of shorthand to just be able to say your basic accountant type or a typical advertising type when describing someone. Every profession has a certain look or standard. Just say banker and you've saved yourself 100 words. It's not always fair, but that's how it works. However, you don't have to be a typical anything. For example, Frank McKinney looks like a cross between a rock star and a surfer dude. You would never guess by looking at him that he's a real estate entrepreneur who sells ultra-high-end residential real estate in Florida. When he speeds by you on his motorcycle in his Versace vest, with his 2 feet of blonde hair blowing in the wind, you can bet he's on his way to a business meeting. But that's Frank's style, and he's very successful. I'm a conservative dresser due to business considerations and to save time. I enjoy flamboyance in other people. I'm more interested in what a beautiful woman might wear than in anything I might ever put on. Be aware that your attire can literally become a costume. I've known a lot of terrific-looking scoundrels and a lot of well-dressed bums. Being tasteful is being tasteful, no matter what line of work you're in. Sure, it helps to have the money to buy great clothes, but a little style can go a long way.